Chapter 12. She Cannot Hide Forever. The story is told by Zechariah. We soon found out what had happened. The boy had indeed been hiding out not far from the village, venturing in to steal food every few days. He came to our house, he said, only because he had not been there yet. He had had no idea that Mary was staying there. He had waited until Elizabeth came out to go to the well, and then seized his chance, running into our little courtyard to scavenge her freshly baked loaves and a handful of the figs that were drying in the sun. But as he hurried out again, stuffing food into his tunic, he knocked straight into my wife, who had returned to fetch something she'd forgotten. Poor Elizabeth managed to stay on her feet, but her pot crashed to the ground, and Josiah found himself sprawling among the herbs. "Thank the Lord the baby wasn't harmed," Mary breathed as Elizabeth related this, and Josiah hung his head. Elizabeth had taken pity on him. It was like her, and brought him inside to give him a proper meal. He needed it. His tunic hung loose on his bones, and his face sagged like that of a much older man. He told us he had been running away, not only from the soldiers I'd met, but also from the rebels he had fallen in with on the road south. "I thought they were like me," he explained, "fighters for the kingdom, people who wanted to see a proper king on the throne again and get rid of Herod and the Romans. They told me that the people we attacked were Herod's men, and the money we stole was for a good cause, but it was all a lie." His voice was hoarse, even after he had had his fill of water and food. It came out as a growl. His eyes were sunken beneath their lids. He certainly sounded and looked like a murderer. But he insisted that the soldier's claim was untrue. He had not killed anyone. "I nearly did," he said. I came close a few times, but I never injured anyone so much that they could die. I am sure of it." I nodded thoughtfully. It was difficult to decide what to do. Not once Elizabeth had already taken the boy in. Taking a wax tablet, I wrote a simple message and passed it to him. "Stay here," it said. "Hide. Do not go out." The poor boy almost burst into tears when he read it. "You'll be safe here," Elizabeth said warmly, giving him another portion of lentil stew and ladling some out for me and our niece too. And that was that. Mary seemed pleased enough on the surface to see the brother of her betrothed. She chatted to him about his family and tried to make him laugh. But she also seemed quieter and less sure of herself after that day. At first I thought it was because his presence made her homesick. It was quite right that she should miss her young man. Of course, his name was often on her lips, and Josiah naturally reminded her of him. But there was something else too. Was she afraid of the boy? I had believed him when he said he was no murderer, but perhaps she feared I'd been too hasty. She was kind and polite to him, easy and friendly enough when they were talking, but I noticed her get up and walk away quickly sometimes when she heard him about to come into the room. She spent more time outside the house now, finding excuses for errands. I was sure of it. At last, my curiosity and concern were too great. I pulled Elizabeth aside and mimed my question. I nodded at Mary and pulled a sad face. I nodded at Josiah and raised my hands in a queering gesture. The pantomimes I had to go through in those days, but Elizabeth was good at reading my signs by now. "Why does she avoid him?" she asked, then laughed sadly. "She's afraid, Zechariah. She's pregnant, and Joseph is not the father of the baby. What will his brother do when he finds out?" I had not thought of that, of course. But of course Elizabeth was right. We knew that Mary was carrying a child, but there were not yet any outward signs. We also knew that the child came from God, but others would be unlikely to believe Mary's story. Elizabeth and I stood watching our niece, whose face was concealed, her head bent over the fire as she stirred the pot. I thought of the certainty my wife had expressed on first seeing her. Why am I so favored that the mother of my Lord should come to me? The mother of the Lord. Mary's child would be God, the same God our people had known for generations, yet at the same time he would be a man, a servant, a son. I did not understand how it was possible, but I believed it to be true. If I was reading the prophets correctly, this child would suffer. He would suffer a great deal. So it was not a surprise that Mary should suffer too. She already suffered, though it was just the ordinary hardship of a woman with child. I saw her face sometimes early in the morning before I went to the synagogue, her forehead creased, her eyes weary. In the evening she often went to bed early, explaining of discomfort or tiredness. But Elizabeth was right, I knew. Mary was afraid of the greater suffering that was to come, when her pregnancy would become clear and all her friends and family would think she had done wrong. Perhaps we should keep her here with us, mused Elizabeth quietly. But she cannot hide forever. It was true. I kissed my wife and went into my own room to say my prayers. I took my time about them. I had a great deal to say.